You're listening to the My Simplified Life podcast, and this is episode number 292. Welcome to the My Simplified Life podcast, a place where you will learn that your past and even your present don't define your future. Regardless of what stage of life you're in, I want you to feel inspired and encouraged to pursue your dreams, simplify your life, and start taking action. I'm your host, Michelle Glogovac, author of How to Get On Podcasts, the podcast matchmaker, and CEO and founder of the MLG Collective. I'm excited to share the stories and life lessons of changemakers and authors with you while taking you on my own journey. This is My Simplified Life. Hey friends, welcome back to another episode. I'm your host, Michelle Glogovac, and today I have a girl within a girl within a girl. It sounds like a tongue twister. The author is Nanda Reddy, who wrote this amazing debut that just became a USA Today bestseller. I've gotten to meet Nanda multiple times now, and I was her conversation partner during her book launch week. So we have gotten to talk about this book, and I am so excited to share more of Nanda Reddy with you and to discuss her book, which is absolutely incredible. It touches on a lot of issues that are going on today, issues that are uncomfortable to talk about, and yet we have to talk about them. So get ready to find out more. Hi, Nanda.
Hi.
I'm so excited we get to talk now. Is it 2 weeks in a row or did we skip a week in between?
I think it's like a week and a half.
I'm like, weren't we together last week or so? I'm excited to get to chat with you again, although not in person this time. So that's a bummer. But before we dive in, can you introduce yourself to everyone, please?
Hi. Yes, I am Nanda Reddy. My book, A Girl Within a Girl Within a Girl, I should have a copy in front of me and I do not. It was released. It's behind me somewhere. I'll
Yeah,
grab
mine is too. I was looking color coded.
it. It came out on the 4th of March. So gosh, 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago. And it is about a woman who hid her identity from her family and is forced to come clean when her sister finds her decades after she's been in hiding, quote unquote hiding. She is then forced to tell her family about her true identity, her birth identity. And so the story goes back in time to when she was a young girl in Guyana. Um, and you meet her on the day her life changes when her father gets this crazy opportunity to send her abroad without papers. And so readers learn why she ended up taking on multiple identities and why she ended up having to kind of ultimately hide herself away to survive. And they learn that in a braided narrative as they watch her try to deal with coming clean to her husband.
I absolutely loved it. And I told you this before when we were conversation partners, so everybody knows, at Book Passage San Francisco. And I felt anxiety as I read the book of what's going to happen and why is this happening to her? And then there's like glimmers of hope where you're like, oh, good, this is how. Oh, no. Well, that was short lived.
Yeah.
Funny, not funny, but it was a beautiful book. And it touches on so many things that really are happening today and that are not far-fetched. And it's sad because a lot of the themes that are within the book, you want them to be far-fetched. I wanted immigration to be far-fetched, to come over here without papers to be far-fetched, for her to be stuck in this work environment and these people who abused her. You want it to be far-fetched, and yet it's absolutely not.
Yeah. So it's interesting in that when I wrote this novel, I didn't think about it being timely. I don't think about it going out in the world at this certain time, or although immigration is always going to be a timely subject, right? We are all immigrants at the end of the day. But yes, so didn't I didn't anticipate that. Also, it's set in the 80s, so that feels like a long time ago. Her immigration story is, I wanted to really capture that desperation that the Guyanese people, because it's a very specific story about a Guyanese girl and her family. I wanted to capture that desperation, though they felt that that my family even felt in fleeing or leaving the country at the time. It was a fledgling country. It was, it was a former British colony. It was freed from Britain in 1966, but it wasn't a democracy or a nation until 1970. And so, like 15 years into its countryhood, there was a lot of political upheaval, unrest. It was a struggling young nation, and all the stuff that comes with a struggling young nation, all that uncertainty, and was very present. And so at the time, everyone was trying to leave. And my family, we were fortunate in that my dad had a brother that left years before, and or a decade before or more, and was a citizen in the United States and was applying for all of his siblings. And so that's how we were able to come out, my family. But there was just this desperation to leave. When you got that visa, you won the lottery. It was, that was the feeling. And if you didn't get a visa, or if you didn't have someone abroad, there was this desperation to get out, and a lot of people turned to smugglers. And so I wanted to capture that feeling, because that that something similar is happening right now in the world. Venezuelans are trying to leave. That's why our borders are clogged with people, and that's why sometimes you find young people without their families, because it's not because their parents didn't love them, or they're fleeing some sort of abuse there or anything. It's because they really believe in this land of milk and honey, and they desperately are trying to get to a better economic situation. So I wanted to capture that. I didn't, at the time of writing it, think about, all these things are definitely happening to people right now. As I was writing it, these things were happening to her. This was her story. This was her experience. And I knew things would happen to her, because at the end of the day, the story I wanted to tell was one of identity and erasure, right? So as an immigrant, when you come to this country, or most immigrants when they move to the West, or any country that has the kind of the prevailing world, like the countries that are in control, that have this is what's right. When you come to a country like to America, you feel like you have to fit in, right? You have to change, and you have to erase all the parts of yourself that are wrong, to fit in. And you feel that, especially if you come to this country at a formative time, kind of like I did, and like this character in the book does, that everything you've known before about yourself is wrong. And so I wanted to explore what that was like for this character. And in doing so, I knew she would be just separated from her family, and then also be forced to or want to leave her situation that she was thrust in. And so I knew things would happen. The things that ended up happening, are, as I wrote them and as they happened to her, were difficult. They're difficult things. And sometimes I did wonder, is this too much? Like, should I, but it's what was happening. And it felt kind of real to her. And when I took a step back and thought, is this too much? I knew it wasn't, because I, like you were saying, knew this happens, unfortunately, all the time. Commonly, we just don't like to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
We try to like make it pretty, or or say it only happens to very small numbers of people. This is not common, even if it's not related to an immigrant. Like some of the things that happened to her, the abuse that happens to her it's very common, in our country, just in many households, and the way it even happens in this book. And it's something we try not to talk about. A couple of the books that are bestsellers right now, or that people like know my name, Chanel Miller and the Tell, they talk about very difficult, and these are memoirs. And whenever
Mm-hmm.
we get some of these memoirs out, we think, oh, this is a very specific personal story to this one person. But the reason they do so well, I think, is because so many people can relate to them. They're little, there's that sort of trauma, that sexual trauma happens, unfortunately, to so many women. And so, as I was writing this story, um, and these things were happening, I was, of course, telling her story. And when you're a writer, sometimes that just kind of starts coming through, and you're controlling it, yes, but you also are just telling those characters' story on a story that as it comes out, and so there's like it's controlling you too. Um, but at the same time, I always wonder, like, is it too much? And I think I tried to strike a balance of the story feeling honest, but also being truthful. And um, even though all these terrible things were happening.
Did you,
So,
after you wrote it and then you read it, did it ever feel like, because this happened to me, and my book is nonfiction, obviously, it's a how to, but I felt like there was an out of body experience where I don't even remember writing some of the words that I wrote. And I went, well, who wrote this? Oh, I
yes.
did. Okay. Was it like that, especially in some of these scenes that you have not experienced firsthand? Did it ever feel like that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Sometimes, like the next day, because often, as a writer, you go back and reread the words of the previous day, and you're like, God, did I really write that yesterday? And yes, there is this, and you want to get in the flow, right? That is the goal of all writers, getting in the flow. But you get in that flow sometimes, and the things that flow out of you onto the page, it is like a whole different person that took over your body, or a whole different entity took over your body and just kind of wrote through you. And sometimes even it's kind of, you're like, wow, that is really good. I don't think I wrote that. Someone else just kind of took over my body and wrote that.
Yeah.
And that's, of course, then you have the other days where you're like, yeah, I definitely wrote that. That it needs to go.
I felt it
um,
as I read the audiobook because I'm reading it and I went, wow, that's really good stuff right there. And the engineer's like, yeah, you wrote the book, right? I'm like, I did. I don't remember writing this. I have no idea who did this.
yeah,
What were you doing before this? I'm sorry, go ahead.
but I was just gonna follow up with that. Like, when you sit down to write your next book, you're like, well, I don't know if I could do that again, because I don't know who wrote that book.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
What were you doing before you wrote this book? Because this is your debut and it's phenomenal. So, what have you been doing all these other decades?
Well, I have been writing. This is the first book I've published, but it's the fourth novel I've written. So I have three other shelved novels, and the funny thing about them is that they don't actually feature Guyanese American protagonists. They feature brown characters that are sort of generically brown, where their past didn't come into play that strongly. And I think it was because I was afraid to write anyone who looked like me, who came from
Mm,
my past. Because even though this story is not mine, I mine from my life, I think, in writing it. And of course,
sure.
some of the stuff just sort of comes out. When I started writing the main character, Sunny, in Guyana, the sister that showed up next to her was deaf, and I happen to have a deaf sister. And so, at first I was like, people are going to think this is my sister. And I just kind of didn't mind that voice, because I didn't know if this book was going to get published or if it was going to get finished or anything. So I let myself write it. And the sister turned out not to be my deaf sister at all, her circumstances and everything and who she is. Um, and the whole deaf world turned out not to be at all like my deaf sister's deaf world. But I feel like I forgot what you asked. But
What you
what
were
the,
doing before all of
oh,
this, but I love that you're bringing this up because in our conversation, I felt this was a big a big part of your book as well is this representation, not only of Guyanese Americans and Guyana itself, but the deaf community, and how you brought this as part of your book, because I love it. And I don't have deaf family, but when the kids were babies, I taught them baby sign language. In fourth grade, I had a teacher who knew sign language. So I can sign some Catholic songs from church, which is totally random, but I can do strain,
Yeah.
no problem. So there's always been this connection, fascination with sign language. And so I was so excited to read this part of your book, because it's not only the sister, it carries on to the children and, beyond the family. So I love that you brought that part of your life into it.
Yeah, no, so this book again was different from the other three because it mined from life, and the deaf part of it. So I speak some sign language, very rudimentary sign language. I sign the alphabet, and like you, I know a couple of songs by heart, which is so random because I learned it, and yeah. But I couldn't sign this conversation to you, partly because
Right.
my brain couldn't work that fast, and because I'm not fluent. And that's one of those things I'm sort of embarrassed about. And but the deaf world, I've read enough about the deaf world and the way like deaf language and deaf schools worked in the 80s and 90s. They didn't encourage that. They were still at that time encouraging speech and trying to get these deaf children to speak. And I remember when my sister, when she came home, she had just started like at her deaf school, which was late for her. It was like late middle school that they finally, because she was older than me when we came to this country, that she went to a deaf school, and she would like touch her throats because she was there. She was like, that's what they told us that we have to do when you're speaking, is touch your throats. And so I can get the sound. And that's just bizarre, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, um, yeah, I tried to show in this book a deaf utopia. Niall DeMarco is a deaf like celebrity. He won Dancing with the Stars, and he's a very good-looking guy. But he lived a deaf utopia, and his memoir is called Deaf Utopia. And reading his Deaf Utopia, I just thought, gosh, because he's like, would be wonderful if all deaf children grew up in a world like this. And so I wanted to show Maya trying to do something like that with her children, and Dwayne's sister kind of lived a deaf utopia, and that she was able to have a career in this family that supported her. And even though my sister didn't live that, I wanted to show kind of that, right? And then even in Guyana, I fictionalized all of that. There was no deaf school that came. We left before any of that would have happened anyway, but like there was nothing like that. And I wanted to show, well, why couldn't it be like that, right? Because there's enough terrible stuff happening in this book that like we needed to have some characters having good stuff happening. So yeah, that's kind of how why I went there and how I went there. But really, when the character showed up at the deaf sister, and then it ended up being such a crucial part of how the plot worked, and her like letters back to her sister were part of her processing her assimilation.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, it tied in very nicely and is not at all autobiographical because of all of that, of course. And I ended up asking my sister, making sure she was okay with that. And she said yes. And she was honored and excited. And so, yeah, it all worked out.
I love that. How long did it take you to write the book? Like, what did this process look like?
So I started in 2020. Actually, I wrote it during COVID. For me, COVID was a good thing. I ended up learning how to sit my butt in the chair and really get in the flow. Before that, my kids were, I was a full-time mom. My husband's job effectively made me a like single mom. And so I didn't have a lot of time to write, and I wrote in little piecemeal, like in piecemeal fashion, constantly dropping that needle and picking it back up. And um, with this book and with COVID, I learned how to. I finally sat down and like just wrote and wrote and wrote. And um, so it took me 2 years, but I actually needed a little help. I signed up for a Writer's Digest class. that forced me to like, well, forced you didn't have to, but I paid enough for it and I wasn't going to waste it, that I turned in 10,000 words at a time. And so I had every 3 weeks, you had a 10,000 word deadline, which is, a lot. And it forced me to get that first draft done because I did the class 2 times. It worked so well the first time that I was like, oh, I'm going to sign up again. And that's how I got the book done, the first draft on paper in a year and a half. And I had already, again, written those other books. And I think it prepared me because I'd been studying craft along the way too and taking workshops. And so I was ready to write this book. And along with, with COVID hitting, when I sat down to write, I had the option of going back and editing one of the other books, but this book had been rattling around in my head for a little while. Um, and I knew it was kind of like the story I was made to write. I was born to write this story in a way, and I don't think anyone else could have written this story, right? The
Mm-hmm.
deaf characters and all of it. But I, uh, I just, yeah, I was ready to write it. I was ready to get it out. And I'm one of those perfectionist writers. I can't help but like try to perfect. I could
Yeah.
spend a day on a line. I really can. Um, so taking that class forced me forward, but by the end, I needed eyes. I needed some feedback, and so I did like beta reads. I started out with critique groups, and I'm a very unconnected writer. I'm not ensconced in any sort of literary community. Reno is not a literary hub. Um, and so I found all these people online through Scribophile and critiquematch.com. And I had critique partners. And then when you find someone whose work kind of is on the same level as yours and kind of looking for the same things, I would text them and be like, hey, would you want to do a whole swap? And that's how I found some beta readers. And so I would read their work and respond to the entire thing and they would do the same for mine. And I feel like when you're a long form writer, that your first work needs to be seen that way because you could have a beautiful chapter that just does not belong in the story because it didn't,
Mm-hmm.
structurally isn't needed. And so, or like characters could be wrong or like, and so I got to do some of that developmental edit work with beta swaps and alpha swaps. And then on Scribophile, they do have a lady who's amazing because she organizes a huge swap with anyone who's interested every few months. She goes by Noelle Fudge on there, and I don't know if that's her actual name, but I've sent her so many thanks because that was instrumental in finding people to like do entire swaps with. And she organizes it, and it can't be easy. It's a lot of work. Um, but yeah, that's how I found a lot of these beta readers, and I ended up having about 10 12, and that's when you get to a point where the feedback is uh mostly positive and or all positive and like then you're like, okay, I'm ready for an agent. And that's when I went out in the slush pile, and of course then you edit again because I
Right.
had to revise and resubmit, and I edited. And then my second round of my second big round of looking for an agent, I landed my agent. And then you edit again. There was two rounds of decent amount of editing with my agent, and then we went out on submission, and then we found my publisher, and then I edited again, and so yeah.
And then you hit the USA bestseller list.
Oh,
So,
yeah,
no
it's worth
big
it.
deal.
And so all that editing was worth it. I know. It's so exciting. I mean, you'd like to think you could do a book all on your own, and yes, you write it, but and you do the edits yourself, of course. Not like the editor is telling you what to write. You do all of that. They're just like, maybe, but maybe take out this character, maybe add more here, that kind of thing. That's the editing. But it does take like a village
Yeah.
to it really does. It really does.
And you mentioned your husband, and we have to give him a little shout out too, because I didn't know until after we had our conversation, because there's a part in the book where I was like, how does she know about this? And then I Googled you some more and I went, oh, her husband's an oncologist.
Yes.
We're not going to give away any part of that, but your husband plays a part in the book too, at
Um,
least in the research you did.
yeah, no, absolutely. So, I mean, I wouldn't be giving a lot away to say that her sister, because the first page of the story, her sister writes a letter and
Yes.
says, when she finds her, she's like, I have cancer and you might have a gene. And she had breast cancer and she said, you might have a gene. And my husband's been practicing oncology for 22 years now. He's in our town. Um, and so, yeah, he was a wealth of knowledge. I had definitely written it incorrectly initially because I was like, I had given her a different sort of as I had her falling, and that's how it was super convoluted. The sister had fallen and had an X-ray, and then they found the cancer. And he was like, "Yeah, it wouldn't happen that way." I was like, "Well, I thought it was be in the bone." He was like, "Yeah, then it would. No, it wouldn't. If it went to the bone, she'd be like." There, she wouldn't live at the end. Anyway, so um, there was a lot of like that, and then even there were parts where there was conversation with an oncologist, and I was like, well, would he say it like that? And he's like, no, I don't think he would say it like that. He would say it like this. So there was a little bit of that. Um, yeah, it was. I'm lucky to have had that resource.
I love that. And then the other thing that I love, the name of the book, the title of the book.
Mm.
It will all come together as you read the book, A Girl Within a Girl Within a Girl. It sounds like a mouthful. And then you're like, well, what exactly is a girl within a girl within a girl? And then you get the line in the book and it's, ah, it all makes sense and it is perfection.
Oh, I appreciate that. That wasn't always the title. My working title was A Life of Deafening Lies. And I kind of had always wanted like the deaf in there, which
Hmm.
is why that I had that title, but it was never the right title. And then I workshopped a couple of chapters at the Community of Writers, which is a big workshop in Tahoe. And in my workshop group, everyone, you like draw a heart or a smiley face or a star or whatever next to a line you love, like if ever that happens. And almost everyone like starred that line you're talking about. And I was afterwards, I was like, oh my God, duh, that's my title. That's the title of the book. It's not verbatim. It's changed, of course, but a little bit. But yes, it echoes it. And I knew when I was like, oh, that's the title. Um,
Yeah, it
yeah.
fits so perfectly. I loved it. And when I got to that, oh, okay. Everything's gonna make sense, and it is just beautiful, and if anyone gets the chance to have you autograph their book, like, that makes it even better because I came home like, "Oh, look at what she did on the b" oh, yeah, you'll just have to find out. Maybe I'll post a picture if you're lucky, but it's perfection. It's so original, and it's you. I mean, it's amazing.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
So do you have another book in the works?
I do. And this one does have a Guyanese American protagonist, although it's not set in Guyana at all. She's and a lot of hard stuff happens, and I don't know if that why I always go there. Stuff's happening and I'm like, why just go there.
I love it. Why
um,
not? Why not? Just go there.
and it's also pretty fast paced because I tend to, I mean, this book was really fast paced. And I think I like reading really fast paced books, and so I
It
write
gets
that
you
way.
through. Otherwise, if it's not
Yeah.
fast paced, you're like, how much longer do we have?
Yeah.
Where can everybody find you and pick up your USA Today best-selling book, A Girl Within a Girl Within a Girl?
I am at my website, which I try to keep updated, nandareddy.com. And I'm on Instagram, so at Nanda Reddy Author. I have a Facebook, which because it links together, but I really spend more time on the Instagram part because you kind of have to choose one.
Yeah, we all do these days.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining me. I'm so glad we got to talk once again.
Michelle, thank you so much. This is fantastic. I always love talking to you, and I'm
Me
glad
too.
that you had me on.
Thank you. All right. Are you a girl within a girl within a girl? You're going to have to go buy the book to find out. I adore Nanda. I loved hearing her story, how her family came to America, how she wrote this book, and what went into that process and how it just came flowing out of her. She's absolutely incredible, and I can't wait for her next read. Be sure to go pick up A Girl Within a Girl Within a Girl and go say hi to Nanda. She would love to hear from you.